Every scene is going to be different, so you're going to need to adjust the final gather settings on a per scene basis. I've adjusted these values to what looks pretty good to me here, but your mileage is going to vary if you have a different scene or a different lighting setup or even just a different camera view. Those values might need to be adjusted. The general rule of thumb, of course, is you want those values to be as low as you can get away with, because higher settings do not necessarily result in better renderings. They might be more, quote, physically accurate, but your viewer may not be able to tell the difference, and the render times may be excessive. So basically, you want to optimize this so you'll get a render time that's acceptable and still get a decent looking render. Now, this method works pretty well for still images. For animations, it's much more complicated. Because Final Gather is view dependent, if the view changes, then the Final Gather setting is going to change. And in a camera walkthrough, for example, the view changes on every frame. So the end result is you get a lot of flickering. Now, there are ways to deal with this, but for now, let's just leave it at if you're doing an animation, you're going to need to have much higher Final Gather settings, and that's going to result in much longer render times. So what I like to do for animations is actually I don't use Final Gather at all. I use a different methodology called ambient occlusion, and we're going to look at that in a separate chapter. Ambient occlusion is an alternate method for simulating this indirect illumination, but it's not view dependent, so it doesn't change when the camera changes. So we're going to look at ambient occlusion later. For now, just be aware that Final Gather is very good for stills, but for animations, you're going to have to jump through a lot of extra hoops. It's going to take a really long time to render, and frankly, I would advise not using Final Gather for animations at all.